everyone, welcome to Better Us Now podcast. We are three athletic vegan girls from Japan aiming to make our earth a better place with happy animals and healthy humans. このポッドキャストではスポーティーなビーガンガールズ、萌え、アスカ、カホの3人が環境社会問題、ビジネスフィットネス、健康瞑想、生理、子育てなどさまざまな話題や課題について力強く美しく輝きたい女性たちのためにホットな情報をビーガン目線でお届けします。 Better Us makes better us. Hi everyone, in today's episode we welcome Brad Vanstone. Brad is the grandson of a dairy farmer turned plant-based cheese and butter producer. He founded Willicroft in 2018, and in 2020, they made Mother Nature their CEO to ensure nature was placed at the center of every decision they make. In 2022, Willicroft became the first European plant-based B-corp, and they received the highest scoring cheese or butter B-corp grobally. Their products are available in supermarkets in EU countries like the Netherlands and Germany. 日本語でポッドキャストを聞かれている皆さんにお知らせです。今回のエピソードは英語でお届けいたします。日本語で聞かれたい方は次回のエピソードをチェックしてみてください。Alright then, let's dive into the conversation with Brad. Enjoy!So today we're recording in Amsterdam and joined by today's special guest, Brad. And thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thanks
Thank
for having
you.
me.
And we are recording outside so we can probably hear the sound of people and the birds and yeah.
Exactly.
Yes, great. So straight into the questions. So we always ask this question to every single guest because it's always nice to hear their stories about veganism. So how and when did you become vegan? And maybe you can go into also how did your company Willicroft started?
For sure. So I moved to Amsterdam in 2016 and I'd been living in New York before then. I'm from the UK originally.
Okay.
And in New York you don't really have a time to think about anything existential. You know, life is so all-consuming, and when I moved here it was the middle of winter. I basically had a total reset. I quit my job as well in New York, so started to just, I think, become a lot more aware about a lot of issues that had just gone straight over my head in New York. And yeah, some of my initial friends who I met here were quite into certain environmental topics, and so started to really read up on these things, watched a couple of documentaries and read a couple of pretty horrible books about factory farming. And that just sent me down a pretty horrible rabbit hole, but a very necessary one. And it was very clear, you know, what's the first thing I can do to lower my impact? It was to change my diet. And so I actually did that relatively quickly.
So did you go from the like normal diet we say from like straight into vegan diet?
Like no real major transition, to be honest. Like it was a matter of months. And I actually found it a very easy process by actually looking outside of the Western cuisine into a lot more Asian cuisines where things like tofu and tempeh are way more prevalent. So I found it actually really easy to get rid of meat and milk, but cheese was a whole different story.
I can tell you that.
Which I think is what everyone feels, and that was the genesis of Willicroft, because I essentially searched high and low for good alternative plant-based cheeses, and I just couldn't find them, and so I started to make some at home. And my grandparents were dairy farmers, so I had a basic understanding of cheese making processes. So I was applying those, but with plant-based ingredients. And 6 months at home, just messing around in my kitchen, very experimental. And then had some friends around for dinner one evening. They pulled the cheeses out of the fridge, devoured them. We agreed at like 2 a.m. I would go and do a market in a couple of weeks' time. I did that and quit my job quite soon after. So it was actually quite a quick process and quite a natural and there was no real planning to it. I just let it run its course, really.
Wow. Well, I tried your cheese and it was delicious, so I can understand why your friends devoured it.
Well, they were very early days back then, so I'm impressed they did. They've come a long way.
Yeah. Like, what is the difference between like making normal cheese and a plant-based cheese? Is there any difference, or like you just copy the recipe and it changed to
It really depends on the type of cheese. So this is part of the joy of making plant-based cheese, but also the challenge in that there's 2,000 different cheeses to replicate. So if you look at, say, milk, I mean, really milk is, yes, you've got full fat, semi-skinned, you've got certain milks that you used to cook with, but it's really one product with variations, whereas cheese has so many different types, and that's not even including sliced, grated, cubed. So it really depends on the recipe, but a lot of the practices can be replicated, a lot of the basic fermentation techniques. The hardest part to replicate is casein. That's what a lot of people are now working on, just specifically on replacing casein. Some are doing it on a cell-based level, some are looking to create it entirely from plant-based ingredients.
Wow.
So there's similarities and differences.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Very nice. But I'm very impressed that you started in your kitchen.
Yeah.
So it's actually the proof that everybody can start
for sure
making cheese.
I have no culinary background.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely in that sense for sure.
Yeah.
An example of that for sure. Yeah.
Nice. So about Willicroft, I really want to talk about it a little bit more. So you have how many products now? Like a butter, you have butter.
Yes.
And what I tried was Italian aged.
Yeah.
And then also
a grated cheese.
Yes.
And then we have a feta replacement. And then in the winter we do a fondue.
Ooh, that should be nice. Yeah, like warm and cozy at home, I guess. Yeah,
exactly.
Nice, nice.
That's actually the very first one I made.
Wow.
A little bit randomly. It's not the most obvious place to start, but I wanted to make something that was really decadent. And I think if a lot of people think about, a real rich cheese experience, it's often a fondue with friends.
Nice.
It's a very sensory experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then Dutch culture is very much like heavy on cheese.
Yeah,
I assume. So
for sure.
Like for those vegans or plant-based eaters in Amsterdam or like entirely in Netherlands, I think they enjoy a lot.
For sure. I mean, the average person eats, I think it's around 19 kilos of cheese a year. And there's very few places in the world where that's more. Actually, in the Nordics, some countries eat up to 30 kilos a year, which is wild, but 19 is already a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like more than my dog's weight.
Yeah, exactly. When you put that into that perspective,
it's a lot of cheese.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about also like the emission report that you published very recently. When was that around?
We published it in the spring, so sort of late April time.
Yeah, exactly. So like a few months ago, I guess.
Exactly.
And I was very, very impressed about how easy us consumer can read and understand it.
Thank you.
Because it's like sometimes it's like black and white, and then you read it, and it takes so much time to kind of like go through those tiny little letters and. For me especially, I'm not like originally English speaker, so it definitely takes time to read in English.
Right.
So it was super nice that it was very compact, easy to understand, and what I thought it was amazing was that your original butter.
Yeah.
So I wrote this down. So per kilogram of original butter, you produced. As an emission, you had 2.48 kilogram of CO2.
Yeah.
If you compare to the normal, like animal-based butter, it's somewhere around 16 kilogram per kilogram of CO2 per kilogram of butter.
Right.
So it's actually like 8 times less.
Yeah.
And then when I was reading it, I was like, what? It's like a huge difference.
For sure. And that comparison was what we really wanted to focus on, because if if we just published our CO2 equivalent was 2.48 per kilo, you know, that means nothing to someone, right?
Yeah.
You contextualized earlier that your dog, you know, weighs the same amount as
Yeah.
how much people eat cheese. I think those kind of comparisons are so key because otherwise it's just a number, and unless you really know every kind of emitting part of your diet, which no one does, even people in the industry, it's really hard to know what impact you're having. So now you as a consumer or a retailer know, okay, wow, this is the difference we can make. And it's really interesting on the retail side, actually, because a lot of the retailers, they're very aware that dairy is their biggest emitting part of their business, but they don't really know how to change that, and they also don't know how to actually quantify the difference. So that's really the really powerful part about these numbers. And then also on the final side for us, we can really work on those numbers to improve. So you probably saw that we highlighted the 3 main areas for improvement, and that's the kind of can be the focus for the next phase is to work on those. So then we know we're not just changing an ingredient that doesn't have a consequence, for example, or a process, but we're actually really tackling something that can get that number down. So then we're 10-15 times less than dairy butter one day.
That's gonna be our next goal, I think.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it was 4 years in the making.
Yes. So the butter less, because we only released that recently. But we first started to measure the emissions of our cheeses 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And then they've gone through various different iterations as we've actually improved upon them. But 4 years to actually publish the data publicly.
Wow.
It's a long process measuring emissions. I mean, for some, you could definitely do it quicker, for sure. But we also used it to make a lot of learnings and changes.
Was it like one of the to-do thing, like when you made the Willicroft, that you wanted to do this?
Well, it was because we were very early on, we used to base all of our products on cashews, and we realized that cashews are actually really high in emissions.
Yeah.
And so we did a very simple measurement, and it was quite clear that we needed to remove the cashews from most of our recipes. And so that then really gave us the attention to think, okay, every product we have now, we need to measure its emissions, both before we develop it. So for the butter, for example, we actually made a rough calculation before we even brought it to market, and we said it's got to be at least 3 times lower than dairy butter for us to be comfortable releasing it. So it's changed a lot from actually making a product and then measuring it to now measuring before we actually launch it. And I think ultimately that's the way it should go. But of course you learn as you go along.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's very impressive, I have to say. It's very nice to hear like you're putting your effort into those products, and because it matters a lot for vegan consumers, or maybe like if I imagine that this consumer eats vegan cheese for the first time, and it's your cheese, and if it tastes bad, let's say, then nobody's gonna continue buying them. And I think it's very important also that the packaging is very bright and very like simple and very eye-catching, I have to say.
For sure.
So
no, I mean, I think today a product needs to be completely holistic. It needs to taste good, it needs to function well, it needs to be reasonably priced, it needs to have a clear impact, like environmental emissions reduction or a social component to it, and it needs to be healthier than what it's replacing. And that's a lot of things to tackle, but that's what the consumer's demanding, it's what the planet's demanding. So that's what it has to be. I think the hardest part of all is price, because if you're doing all of those things and you're a smaller company, inevitably your prices are going to be higher. That's where I think subsidies or supermarkets or the buyers can play a bit more of a role to support things that are fixing big issues. I think it doesn't downplay the need for all of those things to to be right for the consumer.
Yeah, exactly. And we want to talk also about in your process, do you have something that you feel like they need to change in the food industry?
Well, I think the subsidies part would be the first starting point, because this world evolves around money, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, unfortunately.
And that's not going to change. And here in Europe, we have amazing support for farming, but it's placed in still high emitting traditional farming industries.
Yeah.
So the common agricultural policy is worth around 33% of the EU's total budget. So it's a massive amount.
Wow, that's like a lot of
it's insane.
Percentage. Yeah, 1/3.
And that primarily goes to meat and dairy farmers. And I get it from a bygone era when we were placing a focus on a very different industry, but it's 2024, and I think farmers need to be supported in a transition, no doubt. They need to be helped to move on to other forms of farming, but they should not be supported to just continue with the way in which we've produced meat and dairy and the scale of it, in the coming years. So that will be revisited in 2027. It gets looked at every 10 years, I believe.
Okay.
And fingers crossed that gets changed, because otherwise plant-based products will continue to be more expensive than dairy products. So I think that is fundamental to change. I would also love to see it be forced that we all have to measure our emissions, and that some kind of carbon tax is introduced, because again, that will get money flowing in the right directions.
Yes.
It's quite complex. Getting it across to the consumer will be tough, but I don't necessarily think that's absolutely needed. It's going to be a little bit unpopular, but people should be allowed to eat what they want to eat, but they should pay the true price for that.
Yes.
And at the moment, we don't pay what we really should for the food we eat. So those are a couple of big things. And then finally, I would love to see a bit more loosening of legislation, because the dairy industry is so powerful still. So to go back to our butter, the dairy butter, on the back of the pack, the ingredients, all it says a lot of the time when it's in a baked product is just butter, whereas we have to list all of our ingredients. So it puts a lot of companies off making a plant-based pastry, for example, because we only have 7 ingredients. It's a really clean product, but if they can just put butter versus the 7 ingredients we have, they, of course, that's not as it's not as appealing. And then we can't call it butter either. We can't even call it plant-based butter. So it's quite restrictive to just getting it out there and telling people what products we have. So it's just old industries protecting their status quo. And as I said, I'm someone who wants to help the dairy industry transition. I understand that it's not going to be overnight, and its support should be there, but we can't just continue as normal and wait for the perfect plan. People are going to be affected along the way, but do we want to kind of hold everyone back, or try and create some change that has more positives than not? That's the big question. And there's too much inaction at the moment, I feel.
But I also feel the same, that it's very unfair that you cannot call your vegan butter. It's like, because you have to name it differently, and the people sometimes don't understand because it doesn't say butter. They don't know how to use them, or they don't know what it is. Even it doesn't catch our eyes so much, I guess.
For sure.
So I think it's also same in every single European country, especially in Stockholm. We are not allowed to call milk, like plant-based milk anymore. And so they are called like in different names, and sometimes I can say the milk, and then I is like like a crisscross or something. Like they try to kind of like manipulate a little bit with that law that they produce. But also I feel like it's gonna be a long process to change that.
It's a long old process, and meat and dairy is really kicking back at the moment.
I saw I think it was in Netherlands somewhere that dairy farmers or the farmers were protesting with like their trucks or something like that.
It's happened in quite a lot of places, but particularly strongly here.
Okay.
There's some big protests in France as well. But yeah, the tractors were all over the place before some of the elections here. And again, I actually feel sorry for the farmers. Like they've been really just following what the policymakers have told them over the years. So it's really not on them, but we still need to change. This doesn't. We can't just keep their jobs going and continue to pollute the soil and the environment just for a small number of jobs. We need to help them transition into more holistic.
From the top, the government helps them to make the change.
For sure. And the government's just worried about getting re-elected generally, and so we fall back on old policies. But that's also for more of us to say, well, we actually care more about taking action and making change more so than the farmers protecting their role, and not enough people on the other side are speaking up. So it's it will be interesting to see how it all pan out. Like, it will ultimately change. It's just a question of how quickly.
Exactly.
And we needed it to be yesterday, not not in a couple of years' time or whatever. But
we always say that, and then like we try our best, but at the end they have to do something. The government has to do something because they hold the most money.
For sure.
And we can act, but the decision is theirs. And sometimes I feel very much like powerless sometimes.
For sure. I mean, it's even as someone in the industry, the consequence that we can make at the moment is limited. Like, a lot of people think, oh, that's a great case study, they have lots of examples, great values, but in 6 years of doing this, I haven't seen anywhere near as much change as I would have thought, especially after the first couple of years when this felt like real momentum. But it's the bit of the natural flow of things. You see it with many other movements as well. It took decades for certain people to get the vote, and other causes in previous years. So have to stick to it and keep. It's definitely not a time to slow down.
No, I really hope not. Yes, I think we got covered pretty good area. Do you have any last words that like you want to give to consumers or other, I don't know, maybe like other vegan cheese companies or like people who wants to promote plant-based products? And do you have
I think it's really important for everyone to stay I think upbeat and to do what they can, and to be happy with that. I think it's important to celebrate what you are doing rather than what you're not sometimes, because it's very easy to get otherwise quite caught up in just the weight of all of the problems. I think it's also really important to keep an open mind, I think, because let's say you taste a bad product, or if you get if you read a bad story, there's a good product waiting around the corner, or there's a good story waiting around the corner about the environment. So I think it's good to keep a positive and open mind. There's a lot of good people working in this space, and there's a lot of amazing people trying to change their lives on a independent level. So I get a lot of strength from that, but the battle has only begun. Good.
All right. Then, well, thank you very much. It was a very good opportunity for us to actually meet in person. This is actually
absolutely.
Like first in-person episode with a guest.
Nice.
So we've been doing
2 guests, Milo as well.
Yeah, Milo as well. Like he's
been a little
around.
quiet today, but
well, thank you very much, and
very
you're
welcome.
more than welcome anytime to be back on the podcast.
Thank you.
And if you have something to share with the world,
cool. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, you have listened to the conversation with Brad. I really hope you enjoyed hearing this interview as much as I enjoy talking to Brad. If you enjoyed this episode, give us a rating and a follow on the podcast platform you're listening to. It means so much to us and it will help the others to find this podcast easily. We also have social media like Instagram and Facebook, so don't forget to check it out for announcements of giveaways and events and more. You will find the links to Willicroft's Instagram account and the link to their Product Emission Report on the show notes. So, if you want to know more about their amazing products and their passion to make plant-based cheese and butter, go ahead and check them out. If you have any questions, feedback, and guest requests, don't hesitate to email us to this very address, betterearthn@gmail.com. Last but not least, I would like to thank our guest Brad, and most importantly, thank you so much for listening and see you next time. Bye bye!